The grand halls of the historic royal estate were alive with a rare kind of silence, one that did not feel peaceful, but tense, almost watchful. It was the evening of Princess Anne's carefully arranged private reception, an event meant to celebrate charity achievements and strengthen unity within the extended royal circle. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every guest carefully selected, or so it seemed. But beneath the polished silverware, soft orchestral music, and polite conversation, something unusual was unfolding. Whispers had already begun circulating before the first toast was even raised. Started subtly, an exchange of glances between staff, a brief pause in the movement of security personnel, and a quiet recalibration of seating arrangements near the east wing. No announcements, no confrontations, just silent adjustments. And at the center of it all stood Prince William. He was calm, composed, almost unnoticeable to those not paying close attention. Yet those who knew him understood something different entirely. William was observing everything. Across the hall, Queen Camilla was engaged in conversation with a cluster of guests who had arrived earlier that afternoon. They were her known associates, individuals who had increasingly become part of her informal inner circle at royal-adjacent events. Their presence tonight, however, was not as universally accepted as they might have assumed, especially not by William. Princess Anne had always preferred order over spectacle, discipline over drama, yet even she could sense a disturbance in the rhythm of her own event. Princess Anne had paused mid-conversation twice already, her sharp instincts picking up on the subtle shift in energy across the room. Something was being rearranged, quietly, efficiently, and without permission from anyone except one man. William moved through the reception like a shadow with intent. He exchanged polite nods, brief greetings, and neutral smiles. Nothing in his demeanor suggested confrontation, but behind him, subtle changes followed like ripples in still water. A guest near the western gallery was politely escorted to a different seating area. Another was informed that their invitations had been re-verified and required a short discussion in the adjoining corridor. No raised voices. No scene, just quiet redirection. Within minutes, the pattern became clear. Camilla's guests, the ones she had personally ensured were included, were being separated from the main gathering. Not removed in a dramatic or public way, but filtered out of key positions where influence and visibility mattered most. Were still present in the building, still technically attending, but their presence was being softened, diluted, contained. And no one seemed willing to challenge the process, except one aide, who hesitated near William as he reviewed a discreet guest list on a tablet. Highness, the aide began cautiously, lowering their voice. Those guests were confirmed under Her Majesty the Queen Consort's invitation list. William didn't look up immediately. His expression remained neutral, almost detached, as if he had anticipated the question hours earlier. "I am aware," he replied calmly. A pause followed. The aide shifted uncomfortably. "Then should we still proceed with the adjustments?" Now William looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, no visible frustration, only certainty. "Yes," he said simply. "Proceed." Aide hesitated for half a second longer than necessary before nodding and stepping away. Across the hall, Camilla noticed the change. At first, was subtle. A guest no longer standing where they had been moments earlier. A whispered conversation that ended too abruptly. Staff member guiding someone gently toward the side corridor. Her expression tightened slightly, though she maintained composure. She turned to one of her attendants. "Where's Lord Fenwick gone?" she asked quietly. The attendant hesitated. He was asked to step aside briefly. "Majesty." By whom? The pause that followed was long enough to feel intentional. "The Prince of Wales," came the careful reply. Camilla's gaze sharpened. For a moment she said nothing. The music continued, glasses clinked, and laughter carried on around them, but the atmosphere had shifted for her entirely. Meanwhile, William continued his quiet operation. Wasn't expelling anyone. That would have caused headlines, outrage, disruption. Instead, he was doing something far more controlled, restructuring presence, ensuring that the individuals who shaped the tone of the room were aligned with what he considered appropriate for the occasion. Princess Anne, ever perceptive, finally approached him near the edge of the ballroom, where tall windows overlooked the dark estate gardens. "Rearranging my guest list at my event," she said bluntly, her voice low but firm. William turned slightly toward her. "I'm ensuring it remains stable," he replied. A faint pause hung between them. Anne studied him carefully. "Stable according to whom?" William did not immediately respond. His eyes flicked briefly across the room. Camilla still engaged in conversation, unaware that several of her closest associates were already being quietly relocated. "According to what the institution can afford tonight," he said at last. That answer did not fully satisfy her, but it did not provoke further argument either. Anne was not someone easily swayed by authority alone, but she also understood the value of timing. And tonight, something about William's actions suggested timing mattered more than explanation. Elsewhere, tension was beginning to ripple outward. A few of Camilla's guests attempted to return to the main reception area after being redirected, only to find their access subtly blocked by staff who offered polite but firm redirection. Just for a short verification, one aide said gently. It will only take a moment. Moments that stretched longer than expected. Moments that quietly kept them away from the core gathering. And still, no public disruption occurred. William had designed it that way. As the evening progressed, Princess Anne's event continued outwardly as planned. Charity speeches, polite applause, and refined conversation. Yet beneath the surface, an invisible boundary had formed within the room. One side remained central, visible, and engaged. Other was slowly being pushed toward the margins. And Camilla, increasingly aware of the shift, found herself watching William more closely than the speeches being delivered at the front of the hall. Because whatever he was doing was not impulsive. It was deliberate. And it was not finished. By the time the evening reached its formal dinner segment, atmosphere inside Princess Anne's reception had transformed in ways few could openly acknowledge, but everyone could feel. The seating arrangements, once carefully balanced to reflect unity across the royal household and affiliated guests, now subtly reflected a different structure entirely. Those connected to Queen Camilla found themselves placed further from the central table, their presence still intact, but no longer influential in the flow of conversation or attention. It was not an expulsion. It was something far more precise, a quiet repositioning. At the heart of it, Prince William remained composed as ever, engaging in polite exchanges, offering brief smiles, and acknowledging remarks with practiced restraint. Nothing in his outward behavior suggested disruption. The structure of the room now reflected his earlier decisions with unmistakable clarity. Across the hall, Princess Anne observed the final arrangement in silence. She had not intervened again. Whether out of acceptance or calculation, she seemed to recognize that reversing the situation at this stage would create a greater fracture than allowing it to settle. Camilla, however, was no longer merely observing. She was assessing. Her earlier confusion had hardened into controlled understanding. She realized her guests had not been removed in any traditional sense. There were no confrontations, no public refusals, no diplomatic incidents that could be easily reported or challenged. Instead, they had been systematically softened into the background of the event, their influence diluted until they no longer shaped the atmosphere of the room. And the most striking part? Almost no one outside the inner circle seemed to notice. As the final toast was prepared, William raised his glass with calm precision. The room followed, a moment of unity, carefully staged, carefully controlled, but beneath it, the real message had already been delivered. Control did not always require confrontation. Sometimes it only required quiet adjustment. Camilla lifted her glass last, her expression composed, her gaze briefly meeting William's across the room. No words were exchanged, none were needed, because by the end of Princess Anne's event, one truth had become unmistakably clear. Nothing in the royal circle moved unnoticed anymore, not when William decided otherwise.